Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Angela Tanner-Dean. I am one of the Associate Division Directors in MSEP. Greg Core, our director, is on vacation today, so I'm going to kick us off on his behalf. I have a few announcements to make before we launch into our presentation today. These are not captured on the PowerPoint, so if you're interested in just taking some notes, or of course the recording will be posted. So wanted to let everyone know that we've rescheduled the OSEP monthly TA call on the 2023 grant application process for next Thursday, March the 2nd, from 4 o'clock to 5:30. You'll note that the meeting time is scheduled for 90 minutes, and we have extended the meeting in order to cover the additional guidance on the new General Education Provisions Act, or GEPA requirements. We will be posting the 2023 application documents on the IDEA website prior to the call, so we're working on getting those up right now. And the registration link has already been posted on the TA call webpage, and we'll also email it out to folks right after this call. The regular OSEP monthly technical assistance call for the month of March will be on Thursday, March the 9th, from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock Eastern Time. And during that call, the National Center on Inclusion Toward Rightful Presence at the Swift Education Center will present information on opportunities for intensive partnerships and targeted TA to equitably serve students with significant cognitive disabilities. The registration links for both of these calls, the first that I mentioned are the grants, and then the second one, again, are posted on the OSEP monthly TA call webpage and will be emailed to you shortly after today's call. Our regular OSEP monthly call TA call schedule will resume in April, and those calls are scheduled for April the 13th, which will be SPP APR clarification call, and on April the 27th, which will be our regular DMS call. Also wanted to remind folks about the OSEP Combined Leadership and Project Directors Conference. This year, our theme is Connect, Collaborate, Change, the Power of Us. Please register for the conference through the OSEP Ideas at Work website, which is the same website where you find registration links for these monthly TA calls. And you'll see the conference link at the top of the website. The call for proposals, if you are interested in presenting, is open through Friday, March the 10th. So please make sure to submit your proposals prior to that deadline. And also wanted to note that the hotel block is filling up quickly. So if you're able to make your reservations as soon as possible, that would be great. On January 24th, Secretary Cardona announced the new Raise the Bar, Lead the World initiative. Please be sure to check the department's website for more information. If you are familiar with this initiative, the focus areas are achieve academic excellence, broadly improve learning conditions, and create pathways for global engagement. And he's been touring around the country. I know he's visited several states, and we're really looking forward to being able to support this work. So now moving on from those announcements to the topic of today's call, which is McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act and the IDEA. Today, we hope you will learn about the department's National Center for Homeless Education, the rights of children and families experiencing homelessness, as well as the intersection, coordination, and implementation of McKinney-Vento and IDEA. We are super excited to have a dynamic panel of presenters with us today, including John McLaughlin, a program specialist and team leader in the Department of Education, Office of Homeless Education. Patricia Pop, a state coordinator, Project Hope in Virginia, and a clinical associate professor at William and Mary School of Education. Diana Austin, the executive director at SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. Kim Rivers, senior family resource specialist and PTI educator, also with SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. So we're really grateful to have the panel with us today. And then lastly, I'd like to thank Carmen Sanchez, who's a program officer in research to practice, and Jennifer Miley, a state lead here in MSEP for coordinating and supporting us in today's call. So with that, I am going to hand it off to John.
Thank you, Angela. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure and really an honor to be invited or featured at OSEP's National Technical Assistance Call this month, and to present on that intersection of homeless education, programs and special education, the McKinney-Vento Act and IDA. I've worked with OSEP on and off over the years, and my first month here was April of 2008, and that's when the FAQ came out on McKinney-Vento Act and IDA, which of course recently was updated. And I also used to manage the Title I Part D Neglected, Delinquent, and At-Risk Education Program. And certainly we did a lot with Corrections Ed and presented at some ILCs over the years, and sometimes added in McKinney-Vento when we could. We did invite several of our state coordinators for our program to join this call. We think this coordination and intersection is really important. Scrolling through names quickly, though, I do see the names of many OSEP colleagues that I've worked with over the years. And, we appreciate your interest in understanding the rights and services of students experiencing homelessness under the McKinney-Vento Act. As I'll point out later, about 20% of our students, more than 1 million, close to 1.2 million now, are identified with disabilities under IDA. And I think an even greater percent probably when we have enrollment disputes and other conflicts, intersect both populations. We know that OSEP issued updated guidance last fall in November concerning homeless and highly mobile students under IDA. And since spring of 2021, we have also had about 8 times our normal annual appropriation through the American Rescue Plan, so $800 million, to increase identification of students experiencing homelessness, which dropped significantly during the pandemic, and then to connect them, provide wraparound services. This approach seems to overlap with how IEP teams coordinate a range of behavioral and other health and educational support services for students with disabilities. So we hope this presentation can both refresh everyone's memories of the points of coordination between our programs and that the overlap in the population of students we serve, and highlight new opportunities to collaborate, certainly through FY 2024 with the ARP-HCY funds. So on the next slide, I'm just going to quickly introduce our team. There are 4 of us. Except for me, everyone is split on other programs in our Teachers, Leaders, Special Populations unit, in School Support and Accountability, the larger office that has Title I Part A, in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. My colleague Heather Denny has joined us today. She does both McKinney-Vento and Title I Part D, Neglected, Delinquent, or At Risk. She'll be monitoring the chat and organizing questions for us. Sophie Hart, a Presidential Management Fellow, works on Title III, the English Language Acquisition Grant, and Homeless Education. And Brian Thurman is the Foster Education Team Lead, and also focuses mainly on the contract with the National Center for Homeless Education. And then just to go over the topics that I'm going to cover on this call in a rather, speaking a little fast because I know there's a lot to pack in. I want to do level setting to make sure everyone has that basic background of our programs and recent things. Of course, being joined by Pat Pop, who's such a seasoned, experienced state coordinator who knows IDA and McKinney-Vento very well. We'll go much deeper into those points of coordination. Not that I'm soliciting applause, but if you feel like you've been around McKinney-Vento a while, heard of it, know about, its rights and services, could you hit the applause and the reaction so I get a sense of how many people feel like they're pretty familiar with it? Many of you may have been state directors for quite a while. Okay, lots of applause. It makes me feel happy. but I know it's not for me. It's just to give me a sense of what to go, cover more quickly versus in depth. And if nothing else, we're definitely going to mention the resource of our National Center for Homeless Education. You can always call them or email them, actually, homeless@serve.org, and get a response within a business day. And there are often lots of tricky questions we understand around enrollment and transportation and whatnot. I think they're a great resource there. And we'll go over, the resources and requirements of, we say EHCY because McKinney-Vento, there's of course HUD, McKinney-Vento, and, ours is education, and then ARP-HCY. Go over those definitions just to make sure you're clear. Our definitions are different from HUD's, and all of Ed uses our definition, Ed's programs, as well as HHS's programs in the Administration on Children and Families. So it's good to know that. The process for determining eligibility by our LEA liaisons, every district must designate one. And like I said, Pat's going to go into much more depth on those points of coordination. So on the next slide, I'm just going to highlight NCHE's main services and for you, and there are web links here. They, by the way, this is their 25th anniversary year this October. They are at Serve at UNC Greensboro. And they're a bigger team than our program team, about 6 or 7 staff. They provide a suite of TA opportunities and resources, especially to our state coordinators and local liaisons, in-person and virtual, peer-to-peer learning communities, on-demand virtual training courses, tip sheets, and research briefs. I would say that, as we've listed here, the helpline provides, any questions that you want to ask, call that 1-800 number. We get over 2,500 calls a year or inquiries. In terms of products, if you go under resources, they're organized by topic, anything from early childhood education, including early intervention, coordination, K-12, post-secondary, local liaison, state coordinators, school social workers, guidance counselors, and other school staff. We have briefs on special education in McKinney-Vento as well, which we'll be highlighting in further slides. Many webinars, like I said, some are recorded on demand and some are live with the Q&A. They have a listserv that broadcasts newly released products and other updates. So I recommend you signing up for it if you go into resources and click on listserv. And then you can find them on social media as well. Okay, and then going on to the next slide about just the fundamental McKinney-Vento Education for Homeless Children and Youth program that we use that acronym EHCY so much. It is actually over 35 years old now. I believe it was passed in the fall of 1987. And so there have been continual appropriations to states. They've certainly increased from what was maybe just 30 million at the time to 130 million almost for FY 2023. And the main thing, perhaps to understand, it is a formula grant that goes to state departments of education. All LEAs have McKinney-Vento requirements, whether you get a grant or not. Grants are competed once every 3 years. On average, about 25% of LEAs, school districts, receive McKinney-Vento grants, whether that's a 1-year period or a 3-year period. That has changed for a few years with ARP-HCY, as I'll mention in a minute. And we're tied to Title I Part A, both in how the allocations are determined on a formula basis to states. LEAs that get Title I and have homeless students have special set-aside requirements as well, and some of the same academic achievement goals. And let me just see for appropriations. Oh, so the data point, just that for the latest publicly available data, 2021 school year, we're just under 1.1 million students, and 20% of them as students with disabilities. I believe that's going to go up another 100,000 for the 21-22 year that will come out later. I don't know the percent of students with disabilities, but it's probably our most significant subgroup for the data we collect. And if you want more details, we do have a program profile on the link here. So if we go on to the next one on the ARP-HCY program, that was the 800 million we got almost 2 years ago. So it was made available to states in late April and late July of 2021. The focus on increasing identification of children and youth experiencing homelessness, connecting them to wraparound services and other educationally related support services. And some things about ARP-HCY use of funding are a little bit different. What's reasonable and necessary changes somewhat with more funding, but we also have allowed the provision of temporary housing, a few nights in a hotel or motel, for example, when no other resources available, and that would, support the student immediately enrolling in and attending school. Okay, so let me go on to another piece of ARP-HCY is the focus on historically underserved communities. So on the next slide, you'll see that when states submitted state plans to us in September of 2021, they had to write to how they would, work to increase this identification and collaborate with community-based organizations well positioned to do this. And I highlighted the mention of children and youth with disabilities. The administration certainly wanted to do that. And certainly there are intersections with many other groups here. And I'm sure that's also the case with special education. And then let me go back on the next slide. I'm going to just highlight those main rights under McKinney-Vento that, besides defining who is homeless, and we'll go over the definition in a minute, and the focus on enrollment, retention or attendance, and then school success. Those are the three main purposes. The rights include immediate school enrollment, even when records aren't available, to remain in your school of origin until the end of the school year in which you're permanently housed, if in the student's best interest, the right to receive transportation to and from then, until the end of that school year, including LEA-administered preschool, and then the right to receive support for academic success. Of course, what's funded through our grants or Title I, for example, is going to vary by district. All right, let's go on to the definitions. And I see I have about just 1 minute left, so I won't go over every part of the definition, but the fixed, regular, adequate is cross-cutting among all federal programs under the McKinney-Vento Act. HUD uses this, HHS, Veterans Affairs, and whatnot. What's adequate is, a liaison is going to determine that based on availability of housing and other local codes for what might be substandard. The biggest part of our population is that first bullet of doubled up, we say, sharing housing of others due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason, about 75% of our population. On the next bullet, motels and hotels is another 5 or 6% of our population. Trailer parks, I think they mean, campgrounds that have trailers in general. Of course, some trailer parks are have substandard housing or, overcrowding. And that's unsheltered situations like that would be another 5%. And then the living in emergency or transitional shelters used to be 15%. It's gone down a little bit during the pandemic. I think fewer people were in large shelters. So that's the main points of our definition. Going on to unaccompanied homeless youth, a very important subgroup of our population on the next slide. And I imagine this sometimes could become an issue in enrollment and transportation. So first of all, you need to meet the definition of homeless, which I've just gone over, and then not be in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. And there can be all sorts of reasons how or why that happens, as you can imagine. But those unaccompanied homeless youth have the right to immediate school enrollment without a guardian's signature and the right to be informed of their rights under the statute. And then going on to the process for determining eligibility, some districts are very large, a liaison is not. So on the next slide, you'll see that the liaison is very critical. The federal act requires that every LEA designate a liaison, but in large districts, there'll be school-based designees who also do this work. And many states and LEAs use more standard forms. Student residency questionnaires are quite common. We don't prescribe a standard form for that. We do have a lot of TA, though, on determining eligibility. And the LEA ultimately makes the best interest determination with a marked preference for what the parent, guardian, or youth wants. And if the school placement is other than the one requested, the LEA must inform the parent, guardian, or youth in writing and explain the dispute resolution procedure, which gets initiated at the LEA level. And if the parent or youth is not satisfied with the LEA outcome, they can appeal to the SEA, meaning in general, the Office of the State Coordinator. In some SEAs, the state coordinator is more of an advocate for the person appealing, so other staff in the SEA make that decision. And if they're not happy there is no federal dispute process or override, but we can receive complaints and provide technical assistance to the state. Okay, and I'm going to just on the next slide quickly flash, the main brief NCHE has on this process, since there isn't any formula here. We're a lot less formal perhaps than special education would be the determining eligibility brief. And there are some other TA products related to identification, determining and confirming eligibility. And then I think I am at the end of my point. I've gone over a few minutes. I don't think there are questions yet in the Q&A frame. So I think this might, maybe I'll turn it right over to Pat, unless Heather, you've noticed a clarification question come in.
No, we haven't had any questions.
All right, thank you. Pat, over to you.
Okay, thanks, John. So as was shared, I'm the state coordinator for homeless education in Virginia, and I appreciate being with everybody today. So just for a little background, all of my degrees are in special education. So I consider myself to be with colleagues on the special ed side, as well as any of our McKinney-Vento folks who joined today. Virginia is one of only 2 states where the McKinney-Vento Office for the State Coordinator is outsourced and administered through a university. So the School of Education at William & Mary took over the work for VDOE in 1995, which happened to be the year I started in the doc program here. And it was on an OSEP grant. So thank you, OSEP, for my being here. So the overlap of special ed and homeless education has been near and dear to my heart for a very long time. My role here today is to highlight some of the critical points of intersection with an eye to how this might look at the state and local level. So I'll try to give some specific examples of what we've done here in Virginia as I speak. So to start with, Child Find in both Part C and Part B specifically mention children and youth experiencing homelessness. This is a great opportunity for the local homeless education liaison and the local director of special education to connect. The liaisons will know where these children are. The questions we ask families as we determine eligibility for McKinney-Vento can include special education needs or questions about services the child may need. If there are little ones when a family is enrolling school-age children, liaisons or designees can make sure there are referrals and connections to the appropriate early childhood programs. And when special education staff know the basics of McKinney-Vento, they may be the first to learn that a situation is homeless and be able to make the referral to the liaison. In other words, the Child Find can work both ways and be beneficial to both programs. I think that this Child Find piece is really the first step in addressing the OSEP Dear Colleague letter from November, which called for those expedited evaluations. The first step is finding the child. I can share a specific example of an expedited evaluation too. LEAs are strapped with staff limitations and meeting regular timelines in many places, but there might be special cases worth another look. We had a liaison who had a great relationship with her special ed director. And when Donna had a student who was really struggling and had a track record of extreme mobility, she could go to the director, explain that this was a student who might be gone before the regular timeline was over, and advocate for any wiggle room to push it through that was possible. And even if that doesn't work, how about using our liaisons to provide that soft handoff to the next LEA liaison if the family moves, helping to make sure that the information is transferred in a timely manner. Just those extra eyes that can make sure the student doesn't fall between the cracks as an evaluation is ongoing. The next 2 bullets are also ways we can have an impact on Child Find, but a lot of other issues at the state level. I have been a member of our Virginia Interagency Coordinating Council for a long time. I see Kyla's on the call today, and being on the VIC offers visibility to my McKinney-Vento work. Even if it's just giving my title at the beginning of the meeting sometimes leads to those side conversations. I've developed great relationships across multiple agencies and become familiar with a system that's really quite different from what we do in the schools. So it's given me entree to present for our local Part C programs and at our early childhood conferences. It's just making sure the staff in these programs know what we mean in education when we say homeless, and how to find their local liaisons is really critical information. When Virginia recently upgraded its Part C data system, I was there at the VIC asking if temporary housing was being captured. So sometimes it's just a matter of being there to ask a question. And of course, the fact that I've been there has helped me help my liaisons navigate the requirement that they reach out to early intervention. The same benefits apply to being part of the state special ed advisory councils. In addition to the ones I've mentioned, that gave me a place where I was able to spread the word about our ARP-HCY funds and recommend that the local CX at the table consider their liaisons to discuss how the school divisions were going to be using their ARP-HCY funds. As John mentioned, students with disabilities are one of our targeted underserved populations we're supposed to be talking about. So that was a place to try and stir the pot. And I also recommend that my liaisons knock on the door of their local CX to look for other ways to keep the conversation going. Now, I know for some of my state coordinator colleagues who might be on the call, or even for some others, you might be thinking, how do you find time to be at those meetings, Pat, right? Well, I'm going to say something that Phyllis Hunter shared years ago in a keynote for our NACCE conference. If you're not at the table, you may be dinner. And in McKinney-Vento, we're kind of a very small group with a kind of a specialized group of students we're serving. But unless we're at the table, all of the other important needs that are there may gobble up the time that might otherwise be used to highlight some of our students' needs as well. And so when a liaison needs help serving a student, I have those connections and relationships, and it takes me a whole lot less time to find the help needed because I've laid the groundwork by being at those state interagency meetings. We can do a lot at the state level to assist liaisons in coordinating across different early childhood programs, whether it's early intervention, early childhood special ed, Head Start, home visiting. In Virginia, our Virginia Preschool Initiative. My early childhood colleagues have always had me at the table with their work. And I also always tell them that they're the most fun to be with because early childhood folks know how to play. Well, one example of that is we created a short McKinney-Vento 101 video for our liaisons to share with staff as a basic training tool. But because the processes are so different when we're talking about our little ones, we made an early childhood specific version. And all of my state partners reviewed drafts of the text for the video to make sure we represented their programs actually. But besides getting that out to our liaisons, all those early childhood programs also shared the link to the video with their folks. So we were really hitting a wide variety of folks who need to know about this information. And now that we have our ARP-HCY funds at the state level, we're working with a contractor to make those a little more sophisticated than the PowerPoint with Pat Pop talking on them. We always make sure that we talk about McKinney-Vento compliance and talking about early childhood programs when we monitor. And if they're having some challenges with that, we come with those tools such as that video. Or another that we developed, which went across all our early childhood, is our Parent Pack. Our Head Start Collaboration Office Coordinator made collaborating with McKinney-Vento one of the important pieces of her strategic plan, since students who are homeless are one of their priority populations. We put together all of our early childhood state programs and local representatives from those programs and McKinney-Vento liaisons. We learned about each other's work, and the Parent Pack was one of the outcomes. We modeled it after something NCHE has for school-age children, but we shifted it to birth to 5. So it's basically just a sturdy folder that can help families keep track of important documents. But instead of saying your child's school, we talk about your child's development. We include a children's book, a bookmarker with a tip to reading to your child, the CDC flyer for their developmental milestones app, our McKinney-Vento parent brochure. And we developed a pamphlet that describes all our main early childhood programs in the state, who you can contact, and how experiencing homelessness may affect that eligibility. And again, with our state ARP-HCY funds, we're looking at translating all those pieces into Spanish as well, so we can reach a broader population of the families being served. So those things are helpful for a liaison who might be meeting with a Head Start office or an early intervention systems manager. to be able to bring those parent packs, always come bringing gifts to be remembered, right? So now they've got something to take with them that can be distributed to families in any of those programs. And also on the Head Start side, I will share that our Head Start Collaboration Office Coordinator has me on her advisory committee, and I include her on our Project Hope Advisory Committee, which isn't a requirement on the homeless ed side, but it's an informal way that we get information from the field and other agencies here in Virginia. And when the Child Care Block Development Grant added homelessness as a priority population, I did a webinar for those folks explaining eligibility and how to connect. When we train our liaisons, we make sure the liaisons know that this is another resource for their families that they need to know about. The last bullet on this slide, I'll unpack on the next slide. So if you would proceed to the next one, I'd appreciate it. So far, the focus has been on more high level, how to connect and build that awareness. But to me, the points on this slide is where the rubber really meets the road in the implementation that touches the students. I think the most significant issue is understanding how to navigate least restrictive environment and school stability. So when we think about least restrictive environment, it includes trying to provide services with neighborhood peers. However, when a child is highly mobile, there may not be any connections with the current neighborhood. The relationships and environment of the school of origin may actually be the closest thing to a neighborhood that some students experiencing homelessness have. That may be even more important than a less restrictive setting for special ed services that possibly could be accessed where the child has moved. So the only way to make a good decision for a specific student is to make sure that both issues are addressed. In a best interest determination for McKinney-Vento, we need to be thinking about what least restrictive environment might look like in the local school. And when an IEP team is considering placement, needs should include the need for stability. In other words, an IEP rep in school of origin conversations and a McKinney-Vento rep in IEP meetings, at least where there are questions about placement, knowing that capacity is an issue. But we also recommend points of contact at the school level for McKinney-Vento. So if you put that in place, it might be even more easier to have some representation of McKinney-Vento in more IEP meetings. The second main bullet may or may not be an issue in your state, but I think it's worth checking. How do your state special education regulations assign FAPE responsibility to LEAs? And what happens when a student remains in a school of origin that's in a different LEA from where they're currently laying their head at night? We needed to create a specific process for this in Virginia, since our state special ed regs say that where the child lays his head at night, that's the LEA that's responsible for FAPE. And that may be an LEA where the child never sets foot in the door of a school. So it took a little while to work that out, but we did. And I will share a resource for that when I'm done right now. And finally, I'll just share that there are state partnerships across McKinney-Vento and special ed that can increase awareness and help make navigating challenges easier. My colleague, Sabrina Gross at VDOE, is our go-to person when we're threading that needle for IDEAs, McKinney-Vento technical assistance, possible complaints, and also for training. Sabrina joined me to train our liaisons at my conference last year, and we teamed up this January to present to special ed directors at our VCASE conference. And then with Sabrina's assistance and the support of our assistant superintendent, Sam Hollins, we developed a document that outlines the processes to follow in Virginia when you're navigating that intersection between IDEA and McKinney-Vento. So coming out the same month as the OSEP letter last fall, didn't hurt getting our attention on this document either. So another thank you to OSEP for that. I will share with Shona the link to that document if anyone's interested. Feel free to use anything that's helpful. So just in closing, there's lots of opportunities to reach out to special ed for our McKinney-Vento folks. And special ed folks, please keep us in the loop with you too. By working together, we'll be able to benefit a whole lot of students on both sides. And I am happy to pass this over to our early intervention folks. So I'll move it over to Kim and Diana.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I believe that Diana was going to start, but I can start as well. My name is Kim Rivers.
Kim, she said she was going to turn it over to the early intervention people, so I wasn't quite sure.
That's true.
So I'll go first and then hand it over to you. So I'm Diana Autain from the SPAN Parent Advocacy Network, former executive director, still work there, but not in that role anymore. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the work that parent centers do regarding McKinney-Vento and families and children who experience homelessness. Parent centers, as you know, are funded by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, to provide information, training, and individual assistance to families of children with disabilities, but also to families of children at risk of inappropriate identification. And in both of these capacities, we support families experiencing homelessness. I think it's important to note that homelessness is associated with poverty, and low-income children are more likely to have disabilities. In addition, the challenges associated with homelessness, including school absences and the emotional trauma of homelessness itself, can either look like disabilities or contribute to the development or exacerbation of disabilities. And then the barriers for all children experiencing homelessness are magnified when the child also has a disability, whether you're talking about getting specialized transportation to the school the child had been attending, or getting the child's IEP implemented in a new school or district, or getting an evaluation completed when the child becomes homeless in the middle of the process. It can really be a barrier to child find, whether you're talking about an infant, toddler, child, or youth. And in fact, barriers can be particularly challenging for the youngest children, such as children transitioning from early intervention to preschool or from preschool to kindergarten at the time they become homeless, and also older children who are receiving transition to adult life services, such as community-based employment, travel training, et cetera, when they become homeless. So I'm just going to give a little bit of information about the way in which parent centers can support families of children with disabilities who are homeless, both at the individual and the systems level. And I'm going to start with Advocates for Children, which is the Parent Training and Information Center in New York City, which first started focusing on children experiencing homelessness in the late 1980s when I was actually the managing attorney there. We released a series of reports on the issue of homelessness and its impact on children's education, which combine information gained from individual advocacy with data on homeless students, research on how to best address the needs of homeless students, and recommendations for improved policies and practices. Then from 2005 to 2021, Advocates for Children operated the New York State Department of Education funded statewide homeless education technical assistance center. They handled over 29,000 cases of children unable to access educational services due to their homelessness. AFC used this information from the individual cases to advocate for improved services and greater compliance with the McKinney-Vento Act. Some of the successes that they had included getting social workers in New York City schools with high numbers of students who are homeless, getting more funding for New York City schools with high needs to specifically serve students experiencing homelessness, and securing busing for students who were living in New York City shelters. Now, Advocates for Children operates what they call Project LIT, Learners in Temporary Housing, to provide individual assistance to the 1 in 10 New York City students who experience homelessness each year. And that includes students living in homeless shelters or other temporary housing. Their individual assistance focuses on common barriers, like the challenges to remaining in the school that they were attending before they became homeless, transportation, the right to enroll in the local school in the area in which they are now living immediately, even if they don't have formal documents, all of the rights that were presented in the presentation earlier about the rights of children who are homeless. I think one of the things that's important to note is that because parent centers are serving families of children with disabilities or at risk of inappropriate identification, the kinds of questions that we get from families encompass all of the different barriers that those families are facing in terms of early intervention, special education, or transition to adult life. And so that includes things like, IEPs and accessing services that are on the IEP, or that additional services that children may now need because of the impact of the homelessness on their existing disability. And secondly, I'll just mention the SPAN Parent Advocacy Network, which is the PTI in New Jersey, where I currently work. Kim is going to talk about some examples of some of the information and support that she has provided to families of children with disabilities who experience homelessness. But I just wanted to mention that we also operate a project funded by the New Jersey Bar Foundation on the education and health rights of children with disabilities involved in the child protection system. And this is important in terms of McKinney-Vento because children involved in the child protection system intersect with the McKinney-Vento Act in several ways. A child may be involved in the child protection system because they live in a household where domestic violence has occurred. And then if the families move to a domestic violence shelter, they're uprooted from their current neighborhood and are treated as homeless under McKinney-Vento. If a child becomes homeless and the family comes to the attention of the child protection system, then they may become involved in that system, either remaining with their family or being moved to another setting. If a child experiences abuse or neglect, and then they're under the custody of the state's child protection system, that child is moved, at least temporarily, to a foster family or group home. And again, the child now comes under McKinney-Vento and its protections. So in this project, we provide training to families of origin, foster families, and professionals in schools and the child protection system about the rights of children with special needs under this important law. And finally, I just want to mention that SPAN is a member of the state's Committee of Practitioners under the Every Student Succeeds Act. And one of the issues that is covered in this committee are the protections for homeless students under McKinney-Vento. So we're able to bring on the ground information to the state regarding the barriers for homeless students and families and make recommendations for improvement. And now I'm very happy to turn it over to Kim Rivers, who will talk about a few examples she has dealt with in her work with families at SPAN. Kim.
Thank you very much, Diana. So as we know, as a parent center, when we provide families information, the typical calls that we get tend to be families that are in some form of crisis. And of course, our students with disabilities, which we get many of our calls, most of our calls coming in from families who have students with disabilities. And those children are particularly vulnerable to the challenges associated with the conditions of homelessness. And we find that very often they are at risk of experiencing a break of services. And so giving families the information that they need so that they know what their options are, what their steps are, tends to be the kind of technical assistance that we share. Most often we find the issues break down into a family's not knowing what their first steps are. And so we will often find that families' district of origin and also find their district where they are temporarily unhoused and give them the critical information of that first step, which is to identify who your homeless liaison is in the district where you are temporarily residing. And of course, contacting that homeless liaison would be the first step into triggering the protocols associated with making sure that that liaison is now going to reach out to the liaison of the district of origin and then start the process to making sure that there are no breaks in services, that student is provided transportation back to that district of origin, and that also they are provided whatever other services that they will potentially need that would have been necessary resources, whether it's helping them identify places to get food or to get clothing, to help make sure that they have insurance, getting sure that all those protocols get started. We find that families are not aware of what their first steps are. So identifying the liaison, knowing what their options are, to appeal to the state of New Jersey, where we are, to file a complaint to the Department of Homeless Education if those steps are not being followed. Some examples would be, for example, a family that has been recently displaced. they're in temporary housing in a new district. Other children have been attending school in the district of origin, and due to the parents' fears of them falling behind, they want to keep them in that school district. Very often we find that the district of origin will say to that family, well, you are no longer residing here. You are not allowed to continue attending school here. You must now go and enroll in your new school district. And so that not having that information puts them in a place where districts can sometimes bounce them back and forth, and say that we're refusing to provide transportation, or saying that you have now reached the expiration for our obligation to assist you. And yes, even though typically, they are required to really start considering enrolling their student in that district if they have been there, even though it's been 1 year. If they are still there and it's a year later, they should be trying to enroll in that district. But if that student has a diagnosis or disability, and the district of origin school is a place that they are comfortable with, a place that is providing FAPE that is most appropriate for their educational needs, then certainly it can really be a conversation of what works for that student, what best serves their needs, what will help them to continue to have some consistency and not have any emotional impact because of them being moved to an unfamiliar school working with new staff. So certainly as a PTI, we have been receiving a lot of calls, especially from the pandemic, from families that are displaced, and providing that information to them as quickly as possible and helping them identify who they should be working with and knowing what their steps are and what their options are, has been critical to helping them, focus on the other parts of their situation when they are homeless. So thank you so very much. I'd like to hand this back now to Angela.
Thank you so very much, Kim, and thank you to all of our presenters today. Such important and useful information was shared, as well as great resources that will hopefully be helpful to other states and other lead agencies who are tasked with this very important work. I do not see any questions currently in the Q&A box, but if Shoshana, if you would like to invite folks to verbally ask questions, we do have about 8 minutes or so left, and we would be willing to and able to entertain questions. Oh, I actually see Diana has her hand up.
Yes, this isn't really a question, but since there is a little bit more time, I did want to just mention that one of the things that's important to note for families who are experiencing homelessness, and another reason why parent centers are so important in this process, is that it's such a traumatic time for the child and for the family. And there's certainly issues of trust and feeling, parents feeling like they don't really know who is going to reliably giving them the information that they need. And so having states, both the homeless, the Office for the Homeless Coordination, as well as the State Office of Special Education, is really important to partner with parent centers, because parent centers being staffed by parents of children with disabilities and having that lived experience really have a lot of trust on the part of parents, and parents really feel that they're going to get information they can rely on. So I really encourage everybody on the line, when you're thinking about that intersection of disability and homelessness, to think about your parent centers as a partner, and think about the fabulous work that Advocates for Children did, with funding from the State Department of Education to help homeless students and their families.
Thank you, Diana. That's an excellent point. The importance of trust for a family who's going through trauma is critical. I Hi, Patricia. I see you
I
popped
could
on
just
camera.
piggyback on Diana in terms of one of the ways we did that here. We shared our parent brochures and resources with our parent centers around Virginia to make sure that they knew. We did our dog and pony show around to all of them to make sure they understood what we were about. And we work very closely with PTSI, which is our state partnership. So they create things, we create things, we review their stuff, back and forth. So it's really important.
Thank you. I am checking the Q&A box one more time. Invite folks to raise their hands one more time in the last few minutes that we have.
There does appear to be a question in the question and answer about
I missed it.
for homelessness for teen runaways.
Oh, okay. Is there someone available to take that? I missed it, so thank you.
It just hit, Angela. So it's a student who is a runaway does meet our definition of an unaccompanied homeless youth. And in McKinney-Vento, it says that students should be able to immediately enroll where they are currently living, if that's the student's choice, or remain in their school of origin. Now, with the intersection with special ed is in terms of who is considered parent for special education purposes. But this is a great place to realize that in IDEA, we have that very broad definition of parent. And if the parent is not acting as a parent, the caregiver would be able, if the student is staying with a caregiver, would be able to take that responsibility. If the parent's acting as parent and saying no to some things, that bio parent would still have the primary rights on the special ed side. If you don't have a parent that you can reach out to, the child may be living someplace where they say he can stay here, but don't ask me to sign anything, then the next step under special ed would be to appoint a surrogate.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I do see another question from Allison related to how to get districts and principals to better understand McKinney-Vento Act, particularly the option of having special need homeless students to remain in their school of origin.
That does tend to be a bit of a challenge. Sometimes, especially if there are behavior issues, it's kind of like, well, that would be an easy one to say, well, you don't live here anymore, you need to go where you live. But we really try and emphasize that, how would you handle this situation if the student lived in your community? And you should be following the same kinds of supports and putting those things around the student. Another thing we're looking at is the overlap of students with disabilities and being homeless and how it impacts graduation. So sometimes it's getting down to that bottom line of saying, we have data that shows these are our most vulnerable children who will not be able to be successful unless we put these pieces in place and use that as part of the argument. So it's pulling on the heartstrings and sometimes pulling out the legislation that says, this is what you have to do.
Thank you. All right, I do not see any other open questions in the box. I think I have access to all of the hands. I don't see any hands. And so I think with that, we will close this TA call out. I hope everyone remains safe and healthy as we enter into the weekend. And thank you so much again to our panelists, to Carmen and Jennifer. And we will see you again next month. Thank you so much.